Women at the Center is an organization of violence survivors, and it's launched a Court Watch project to monitor Toronto's specialized domestic violence courts. Joining us now to tell us what they discovered, Nneka McGregor. She's Executive Director of Women at the Center, Vivian Green, Director of Community Development, Women at the Center, and Katrina Yencheruk, Chair of the Family Lawyers Association. And it's good to have everybody here at TVO tonight for this. Katrina, I'm having this moment of panic that I pronounced your name improperly.
Absolutely not. You've got it correct.
Yencheruk.
Yes.
Okay, good. Nneka, get us started. A Court Watch study. What is that?
So a Court Watch study is a process of having individuals from the community go out into a criminal court and just observe and see what judges are saying, what the defendants are doing, just to get an understanding of what actually is happening in the system.
They watch. They don't participate?
Not at all.
Stay in the back of the room, take notes,
Absolutely.
Observe.
Absolutely.
Why do you think there's a need to do this for the specialized domestic violence courts?
Well, our members had told us, had been saying over the past 2 and 3 years that there were inconsistencies that they were experiencing, which sort of went against what the specialized domestic violence courts were supposed to be doing. They were finding that judges were not using their power and their opportunities effectively. And we wanted to find a way to actually verify whether their statements were true.
We'll find out about what you found in a moment, but first of all, can you tell us, Vivian, how the study was conducted?
Sure. So for this study that we did, which was a fairly short one, we actually used students and recent graduates, which was very interesting because they weren't women survivors who we've done this with in the past, but they were kind of just folks that had had not any dealings with the courts before. So they kind of brought a really fresh view into when they went into court. They sat in a court, observed, and what they did is they did blogs after every time that they went into court. And really the idea is to then have people sit around, think about what they saw, analyze it, and come up with recommendations that identify what's working well in the courts in terms of protecting women's safety and what needs to be done to enhance women's safety.
Any indication whether the judge or the lawyers participating or the defendants or any of the officials knew you were there and what you were doing there?
This time, no. In fact, one of the court watchers actually at one point, it was a young man, and I think the judge thought he was there for the next court hearing, appearance. In a past court watch, we actually did have that happen where we were doing a much more sustained project. And what we found was that some of the people working in the courts were really happy that our court watchers were there because it helps them get a sense of what's going on. And frankly, there were some judges that they really wanted people in the courtroom witnessing what was going on.
How many cases?
In that one, we did about 119.
119, all City of Toronto?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was many years ago.
And how about in the one that you've just completed?
We did about 40 cases.
Very good. Nneka, what did you find?
Well, there were a couple of findings that we found really concerning. The primary one being around the way judges had opportunities to use their position to admonish the individuals who were found guilty of assaulting their intimate partners, but how the judges lacked, they didn't take advantage of the opportunities. We also found that there was a lot of inconsistency in the way that the judges themselves viewed intimate partner violence, where some judges had a very good understanding, whereas the vast majority, unfortunately, did not have such a good analysis of what actually was happening in an intimate partner relationship. And we also found that there was troubling inconsistencies between the sentences that were being given out. So conditional discharge was a very, very common resolution regardless of what the assault was. So whether it was very serious or not, conditional discharge seemed to be the order of the day.
Let me pick up on one of those things. Vivian, would it have made any difference had the judges used that option of admonishing or adding further instructions to whatever they were saying to the defendant?
Absolutely. I mean, what we know from talking to women is, and men as well, and programs, is that the judge is the most senior person in the court. And when a judge sits and looks at you and talks to you, I mean, that's the whole idea of the court. It's a very hierarchical, it's an imposing kind of situation. And what we see is that judges in many cases deal with these things as if they're administrative issues. They're not even looking at the person. And we've certainly heard from women, even when there weren't serious convictions, but just women that say the judge actually talked to him and said, do not do this. This is unconscionable. I mean, it's that a person-to-person thing, someone saying to a person, you can't and you shouldn't be doing this. And sadly, we saw, again, not in all cases, I think the important thing is we saw this wide range. So some of the judges were great, but in other cases, the judges really tended to be more concerned about the defendant, the accused, than the woman, and that's pretty concerning.
Katerina, you're the lawyer. Now we get you to comment on what you've heard so far. What do you think?
Well, I want to indicate that the study focuses on the criminal courts and what happens in the criminal courts. And of course, my experience is in the family courts. My experience is not the same in the family courts. I've been practicing family law for about 22 years. I practice primarily in the Ontario Court of Justice, and I think we have a really educated bench that understands the issues of domestic violence, and they're quite responsive. I think the difficulty is that we have multiple courts. We have a woman who has been assaulted, has to go to family court, she has to go to criminal court. There is a pilot project, the Integrated Domestic Violence Program, which is operating out of the Ontario Court of Justice located at 311 Jarvis. That is a pilot project that started a few years ago, I believe 2011. It's a supported program for a number of reasons, and there's a lot of support for continuing it. It leads to consistent orders. There's some discussion that there's higher compliance with the orders that come out of that. You'll have a family court order that is consistent with the criminal court order. It's felt also that the process may move more smoothly and more quickly, with less confusion to both the individuals accused and the female victim.
I guess I'm wondering as well, though, whether or not the work that they're doing, do you think has a positive impact on what goes on in the courts?
The work of Court Watch?
Yeah.
I really can't comment to that. I would think that it's a good idea to have information about the courts and what's happening in the courts before the public. It should be there for us to discuss and to analyze, and really it's our jobs to see if we can do better. I
mean, in your view, do you see judges being lenient to offenders in the way that's been described here so far? Well,
I can't comment on the criminal courts, but I don't see that in the family courts. I think that they are more than concerned about the issues of violence and the impact on the victim, and in the impact as well on the children, because of course even if the child is not directly or physically assaulted, the child is impacted by the violence that the child witnesses.
Can I just interject? You mentioned an interesting word, which is educated, and I think that's one of the pieces, and maybe it's a difference in family court to criminal, so it could be because we know there are, but I mean, what we're really concerned about, and one of the main recommendations is that judges do need education, and one of the problems with our system is that, at least in the criminal system, the judiciary is really hands off, to the extent that just yesterday I was in a meeting and there was discussion about whether we could give judges a list of accredited programs for men, abusive men, and that doesn't seem to be possible. So
you can't give the judges a list of accredited programs.
Judges cannot receive anything, and this idea that they can't be educated or informed. So I think that's a sorry, Nick.
Becca?
Yeah, and I also want to pick up on your point around the difference in the level of understanding of judges in family and criminal courts. Our members have found that there is a very, very low level of understanding. The contrary to what you're saying, that in fact judges have no analysis, they don't think about, they don't understand what the real issues are that women are facing who are trying to leave abusive partners. And what you talked about in terms of the complexity of the issues and the challenges of making orders that are held up in one court and not being breached in another, and how that when the systems don't talk to each other, it's the women whose lives are at risk. And so when we did this Court Watch, it was really as a way to shine the light on what was actually happening, because although it's a public arena and the public can go in, the public don't. And if the public doesn't go in, they won't know what's happening and what's not happening. And so for us, the Court Watch was a way to shed light on what was happening. And as Vivian said, the biggest concern was how the judges were actually not taking advantage of the opportunity and holding the abusive men accountable.
You said recommendations. To whom?
Well, in this study, again, because it was fairly short, really what most of our recommendations are towards judges, and that's one of the reasons, frankly, that we're really pleased and very happy that you invited us on to your show, because we can't talk directly to judges because of their position. We really feel that the judiciary must, as I say, be informed and understand the dynamics about woman abuse and what's going on. And I don't know if now's the time to throw this in, but one of the cases that we talk about, for example, is where a judge, a woman was in her boyfriend's, they were in an intimate partnership, but they weren't living together. An assault happened. The judge called it a trespass case because they weren't actually, she wasn't on the lease. The Crown was literally pleading to understand this as domestic violence. They had an intimate partnership, and yet this judge called it a trespass, and not only that said, and because it was trespass and this is your private property, you have the right to defend your property, i.e. to beat her up. So that level of lack of understanding, we feel, is hugely important. We as a society have to do better.
Why don't you name and shame the judges in these cases?
We're thinking about it.
Thinking about that?
Yeah.
I personally wouldn't go that route, because I think it's better that we make friends and influence our enemies. But the reason why we conducted it in the way we did and actually took some of the quotes from the judges was just to raise the issue. And the individuals who said these things, the judges that said it, know who they are. But I don't think we're going down the path of shaming.
Well, I think the other thing is that one of the things we found in doing this is that many of the people in the system are equally concerned. And the hope, I mean, in all seriousness, is that we work collaboratively with criminal justice sector reps to figure out ways to get to judges. And I also think it's important to say we know there are some very good people in the judiciary and great people in the system. So it's true. We want to work together, but I think there is an element of making, as Nneka, you said, making this public so that people can see some of these outrages.
Let me try this with Katerina, because it is true, when you walk into a courtroom, in some ways you think you're in a different world. Like, they speak a language that most normal people don't speak. It's a whole different thing. So from these outsiders, quote unquote, coming in and doing what they're doing, can you tell us what kind of impact you think that potentially can or can't have?
Well, I would concede it is bewildering for an individual to walk into a courtroom and not know what's going on. I think the family law context is somewhat different, because that individual will be assisted by a lawyer. And that in itself is an issue, and we've heard earlier this week about increases into funding to legal aid, and we certainly would want that initiative to continue and to be expanded, so women are not going into court underrepresented or not represented at all. And they have that guidance going through the court, because the reality is that we do have complicated procedures in both courts, and that women going through the courts need the assistance to navigate that system.
Do you have any reason to be suspicious of their findings?
I have no experience at all in the criminal court, so I really would not know one way or the other.
Then let me put it to them directly. You two have an agenda, right? Let's just be blunt about it. You two have an agenda. And I'm not saying it's a good agenda or bad agenda, it's an agenda. Some people may wonder whether or not you are bringing a preconceived set of conclusions to the work that you're doing, and you're looking for facts to fit your preconceived conclusion. You want to speak to that?
I certainly do. I would admit openly that we do have an agenda, and the agenda is to find a way to help the system work the way it was supposed to. And that agenda also requires that everybody that's a player in the criminal justice system does their part. So when a woman who is petrified because she's been assaulted by her partner and has been told that he's going to kill her, we want the woman to come forward and disclose to the police. We want her to go and report. And if she reports, we want the police to do their work properly, do all the forensic evidence gathering. We want the case to go forward. We want the Crown to prosecute vigorously. And we want, if the individual is convicted, we want a good outcome so that that individual understands that what they're doing is wrong. If the system that has been set up is failing women, then our agenda is to get the system looked at and to get the system fixed. The agenda is nothing nefarious. We're not men haters. We just want a system that actually does what it's supposed to do, that keeps women safe and holds the abusers accountable. And it's a social issue that impacts all of us.
But your work is objective, Vivian?
Yeah, I think, yes, in the sense that, well, it is, because a wonderful thing about Court Watch is people go in and they actually write down what they see. And again, in this particular one, because it was smaller and it really was a snapshot, we have literal quotes of what the judges were saying. In previous Court Watches, we did a major one in 2006 that was referenced. We have stats around how many breach charges went through, how many attempt murders, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is witnessing what's going on, and in those larger Court Watches, which we're hoping to do as a follow-up to our pilot, it's there. It's all there. And to me, I think the fact that we see what's going on in the system, and there is some good stuff going on, there's also a whole lot of stuff that needs to be changed and improved.
Remember what I said at the very beginning? How the 15 minutes was going to fly by? It has. We're really grateful that you all came in today and shared your views on this. Necka McGregor, Vivian Green, Katerina Yancherek. Thanks so much for joining us at TVO tonight.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.